Something is happening inside the world of football that nobody saw coming. Three national teams, a tournament that was supposed to be the greatest celebration of the sport in history, and a revolt that is now sending shockwaves through every corridor of power in world football. This is not speculation. This is not rumor. This is the story of how the road to the 2026 FIFA World Cup became one of the most dramatic chapters the beautiful game has ever witnessed. And before this video is over, you will understand exactly why this moment matters far beyond the pitch, far beyond the trophy, and far beyond any single nation's ambitions. Stay with us, because what is unfolding right now is something football has never seen before. For months, the 2026 FIFA World Cup was being celebrated as a historic achievement. Three nations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, joining together to host the largest World Cup in history. 48 teams, 16 cities, an entire continent united by the world's most beloved sport. The vision was breathtaking, the scale was unprecedented, and the excitement building among supporters around the world was genuine and enormous. But behind the official announcements and the carefully produced promotional videos, something else was quietly developing. A frustration, a tension, a breaking point that the most powerful football institution on earth did not want discussed in public. And then Spain made its move. The Spanish Football Federation, one of the most respected and decorated football institutions on the planet, began raising serious and formal concerns about the conditions surrounding the tournament. The scheduling, the demands being placed on players, the structure of a 48-team competition that critics had questioned since the day it was announced. Spain is not a nation that speaks lightly. This is a country that won the World Cup in 2010, a country whose players have defined entire generations of world football, a country whose football culture runs so deep that it feels less like a sport and more like a shared heartbeat. When Spain speaks in the language of football, the world stops and listens. And what Spain was saying was not polite. It was not cautious. It was a direct, formal challenge to the decisions being made at the very top of world football. But here is where the story becomes something far bigger, because Spain was not alone. Two more national teams, proud football nations with their own histories, their own legacies, and their own fiercely loyal supporters, stepped forward and aligned themselves with Spain's position. Three nations, three sets of fans, three football cultures, each carrying decades of World Cup memories and national pride, now standing together in a moment of collective resistance that stunned the football world. This had not happened before, at this scale, this close to a tournament of this magnitude. And the question on everyone's lips was the same: what happens next? To truly understand why this revolt carries such weight, you need to understand what the World Cup actually means to the generation of fans who have followed this sport for decades. The World Cup is not simply a competition, it is a ritual. It arrives every 4 years like a heartbeat, marking time, marking memory, marking the chapters of a life lived alongside football. Think about where you were when you watched your first World Cup. Think about the players whose names you learned as a child. Think about the goals that made you leap from your chair, and the defeats that felt like something personal, something that stayed with you for days. The World Cup carries all of that. Every edition carries the weight of every edition that came before it. And when something threatens the integrity of that tournament, when its fairness is openly questioned by nations who have given everything to reach it, it is not just a sporting concern. It touches something deeper. It touches identity, belonging, and the shared language that football gives to people across every culture and every continent on Earth. The concerns being raised were specific and serious. The expansion to 48 teams had been debated for years before it was confirmed. Critics warned that more teams would dilute the quality of the group stage, reduce the intensity that makes the early matches so compelling, and create scheduling demands that would push the limits of what players could reasonably be expected to endure. Player welfare had become one of the most urgent conversations in world football, and for good reason. The modern footballer competes in a calendar that shows no mercy. Domestic seasons, continental competitions, international duty, and now a World Cup expanded to a scale that would demand even more from bodies that were already being asked to give everything. The nations raising their concerns were not doing so to cause disruption. They were doing so because the people at the heart of their teams, the players, the coaches, the medical staff, were telling them something had to change.
And then there were the logistical realities. A 48-team World Cup spread across an entire continent meant travel distances that had no precedent in the history of the tournament. Teams moving between host cities separated by thousands of miles. Players boarding internal flights between group stage matches while trying to maintain physical condition, tactical sharpness, and mental focus. The difference in conditions between a squad whose group matches were geographically clustered and a squad crossing time zones between every game was not theoretical. It was measurable. It was potentially decisive. And in a tournament where the margin between glory and elimination can be a single moment, a single decision, a single inch on the goal line, those differences could define everything. But that was only the beginning of what was quietly developing behind the scenes, because while the three protesting nations were making their position known, something else was happening in the wider football world. Nations who had not publicly aligned themselves with the revolt were privately asking the same questions, privately sharing the same concerns. The football world operates on relationships and alliances built across decades, and when three significant football cultures move together, others pay close attention. Others begin to weigh their own positions. The conversation that Spain had started in public was now spreading through private channels, through federation meetings, through conversations between coaches and officials who understood exactly what was at stake. The revolt was growing, and FIFA knew it. FIFA's official response when it came was composed and carefully worded, statements emphasizing dialogue, commitments to cooperation, the language of an institution that has navigated storms before and understood the importance of projecting calm. But behind the measured tone, the pressure was real and it was building, because this story had already moved beyond FIFA's ability to contain it. The supporters had found out, and when football supporters discover that something is wrong with the tournament they love, they do not simply accept reassurances and move on.
Across Spain, the reaction from fans was immediate and deeply emotional. Former players, men who had worn that iconic red shirt in World Cups past and understood at a cellular level what it meant to carry a nation's dreams, began speaking publicly and with conviction. The same voices that had once lifted an entire country with their football were now lending their credibility and their passion to a cause that felt urgent and important. In the nations that had joined Spain's position, the response was equally powerful. Supporters gathering in the places where football is discussed and debated with the intensity of something that truly matters. Former internationals speaking on television with the authority of people who had lived through the pressures of this tournament and understood precisely what was being asked of the players now. The world was watching, and the world was choosing sides. What makes this moment so historically significant is not simply that three nations have objected to tournament conditions. Objections happen. Disagreements between federations and governing bodies are not new. What makes this different is the unity, the public nature of the stance, the willingness of established, respected football nations to stand together and say clearly and without apology that something needs to change. that the expansion of the greatest tournament in sport cannot come at the expense of the people who make that tournament worth watching, that the commercial ambitions of world football must be balanced against the sporting integrity that gives the whole enterprise its meaning. Because here is the truth that every supporter who has followed this sport across decades already understands. The World Cup is only magical because it is contested at the highest possible level. The tension is only real because the best players in the world are there, fully prepared, competing with everything they have. The moments that live forever in the memory, the goals, the saves, the celebrations, the heartbreak, they only exist because the conditions allow for football of the highest quality. And if those conditions are compromised, something irreplaceable is lost, not just for this tournament, but for the legacy of the sport itself. The road to the 2026 FIFA World Cup has taken a turn that nobody predicted. 3 nations standing together in a moment of resistance that has forced the most powerful institution in world football to listen, to respond, and to reckon with questions it would rather not have answered in public. The story is not over. The negotiations continue. The pressure is real on all sides, and the football world, from the training grounds to the terraces, from the boardrooms to the living rooms of supporters who have loved this sport their entire lives, is waiting to see what happens next. Because what is decided in the coming weeks will not just affect one tournament, it will shape the future of the World Cup itself. And perhaps the biggest moment in this story is still yet to come.